On a world of endless ice, survival is a fragile thing. For anything newly hatched, the cold is a merciless hunter. The wind on planet Cryos never really stops. It's a constant, howling presence that carves the glaciers into impossible, crystalline shapes. It's a sound that promises one thing: the slow, creeping sleep you don't wake up from. Here, life is a stubborn little flicker in a universe of frost, and for the smallest creatures, that flicker is always in danger of being snuffed out, deep inside a cavern of blue ice. 3 of those flickers had just begun. They were no bigger than a man's fist, their scales shimmering with the colors of a frozen dawn, one like a cooling ember, another like a deep space cinder, and the last, the pale gray of morning ash. They were dragon hatchlings, born into a world with no warmth to give. Their nest, just a shallow dip in the ice, was a cradle of death. The leftover heat from their birth was long gone. Their mother was nowhere to be seen, a silent reminder of the planet's harsh rules. All that was left was the cold, a predator coiling around them, stealing their strength with every passing moment. They shivered violently, a desperate dance against the inevitable. Their chirps were thin, reedy sounds, immediately swallowed by the gale outside. They huddled together, a tiny trinity of misery, their new lives draining away into the ice. But then, the smallest one, the color of ash, lifted its head. Its large, dark eyes, already weary from its short life, saw something impossible. Through the mouth of their frozen cave, past the swirl of snow and wind, there was a light. It was faint, a steady, golden pinprick in a world of aggressive, sterile blue. It was a promise. It was hope. To the hatchlings, who knew nothing but the gnawing cold, it was an instinct, a primal pull toward the one thing that could save them. With a final surge of desperation, the leader, the ember-hued one, nudged its siblings. Their journey would be short, but for creatures so small and fragile, it was an epic gamble for life itself. Cryos wasn't a world meant for soft things. It was a planet caught in a permanent ice age, a monument to entropy in the forgotten rim of its solar system. Its sun was a distant, uncaring star, giving light but no real heat. The days were a constant twilight under a bruised purple sky, casting long twisted shadows. The nights were absolute black, broken only by the cold glitter of alien stars and the ghostly green and violet ribbons of Cryos' own auroras. The landscape was a masterpiece of brutal, natural design. Mile-high glaciers groaned and cracked like dying gods. Fields of razor-sharp frostfire crystals captured the dim light and threw it back in blinding flashes. What little plant life existed was cryo-adapted, looking more like glass gardens than living things, and in this magnificent, unforgiving world, a single human had made his home. Kale was a xenobotanist, the only survivor of a research ship that had been torn apart in Cryos' atmosphere. For 2 years he'd been stranded, his life a repeating cycle of survival. His camp was a small, defiant bubble of warmth carved out of the chaos. He'd turned an escape pod into a habitat, its hull reinforced and insulated. A small, quiet fusion generator hummed faithfully, powering his life support, a heat lamp, and a thermal blanket that acted as a door, keeping the worst of the wind out. Inside, Kale slept. Hardship had worn him smooth. His sleeping face showed the faint, etched lines of stress and solitude. His gear, however, was perfectly maintained. Even asleep, he was coiled with a survivor's tension, his hand resting near the vibroknife on the floor beside his cot. He was dreaming of a place he could barely remember, a world with green fields and a sun that felt warm on your skin. He dreamt of rain and the smell of wet earth. He was completely unaware of the tiny, desperate creatures fighting their way toward his lonely outpost. For the 3 hatchlings, the journey was a nightmare. The wind was a physical force, threatening to pick them up and toss them into the dark. Their tiny claws scrabbled for a grip on the slick ice. Snow was a soft, treacherous trap. The ember-colored one, who Kale would later call Ember, took the lead, pushing forward and chirping encouragement to its siblings. The cinder-hued one, Cinder, was more cautious, its head swiveling, trying to spot threats in the gloom. The smallest Ash was timid and weak, often stumbling. Only the nudging from its siblings kept it going. Their shared body heat was fading, their chirps growing fainter. But the light from Kale's camp grew steadily brighter, a beacon guiding them to their only chance. After what felt like forever, they reached the edge of the humans' camp. To their tiny eyes, it was a land of giants. The escape pod loomed like a metal mountain. A deactivated rover nearby looked like the fossil of some colossal beast. The air here was different. It carried strange scents, the sterile temps of ozone, the chemical smell of nutrient paste, and underneath it all the complex organic scent of the sleeping human. It was terrifying, but woven through it all was the most alluring smell of all. Warmth. That the source of this incredible promise was a thick metallic gray blanket hanging over the entrance. It rippled in the wind, and from its edges leaked a steady, gentle heat that was more wonderful than anything they had ever known. It was a siren's call to their cold bodies. They gathered at the base of the makeshift door. Their instinct screamed to go inside, to find the source of that life-giving heat. But fear held them back. Inside was the source of that deep, rhythmic breathing, a sound like the slow grinding of glaciers. It was the sound of something huge, a potential predator. Ember, the bold one, pressed its snout against the blanket, feeling the heat seep into its scales. It chirped impatiently, as if to say, "We have to go in." Ash, however, trembled violently and backed away. Cinder, the observer, stood between them, weighing the options: certain death by freezing, or possible death by predator. Just then, the wind gusted with renewed fury, stinging their skin with ice crystals. Their decision was made. The cold was the enemy they knew. Ember went first, pushing its small head under the heavy fabric. For a moment it was stuck, but with a desperate wriggle, it was through. Cinder followed, nudging a hesitant Ash forward until the timid hatchling tumbled in after its siblings. They were in. The wind's howl was instantly muffled, replaced by the deep sound of Kale's breathing and the soft hum of the generator. They had found sanctuary. The inside of the habitat was a cave of wonders and terrors, but it was blessedly, miraculously warm. The air was still, thick with the scent of the human. Dim light cast long, dancing shadows from strange, monolithic shapes: a storage locker, a workstation, and the cot where the giant slept. The rhythmic rise and fall of Kale's chest was a terrifying sight. Each exhale was a warm gust that ruffled their delicate wings. They froze, instinct screaming at them to hide. But the warmth of the space was a powerful balm, calming their frantic nerves. They took a few tentative steps, their claws silent on the metal floor. They were drawn, as if by a magnet, to the biggest source of heat in the room: Kale himself. He was wrapped in another, softer blanket. One of his legs was bent, creating a tempting, warm tunnel in the folds. Ember, always the pioneer, cautiously poked its head inside. The sensation was overwhelming, like diving into a pool of pure, liquid warmth. The life-stealing cold that had been their only companion was instantly gone. It was a feeling of such profound safety that it short-circuited all fear. With a soft, contented chirp, Ember wriggled its entire body into the dark. Cinder and Ash, sensing their leader's sudden peace, quickly followed. They found themselves in a soft, dark world, pressed against the fabric of Kale's pants. The heat from his body was a solid, tangible thing. It soaked into their bones, chasing away the last of the shivers. For the first time in their short, brutal lives, they were completely warm. Exhaustion hit them all at once. They curled into a tiny, intertwined pile, their bodies rising and falling with Kale's leg. They fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Hours later, as the light in the habitat cycled towards morning, Kale began to stir. He surfaced slowly from his dreams of a green earth. But something was wrong. There was a strange weight on his leg, and it was moving, a subtle, wriggling sensation. Instantly, Kale was wide awake. 2 years on, cryos had taught him that anything unexpected was a threat. His mind raced. Had some native creature found a way in? His heart hammered his ribs as his hand moved with silent, practiced speed, his fingers closing around the cold grip of his VUD. He didn't move a muscle, barely daring to breathe. With infinite slowness, his other hand moved to the edge of his blanket. He held his breath, prepared for an attack, and lifted the corner. He braced himself for some fanged horror. He did not expect what he saw. Curled up in a neat little pile on his leg were 3 of the most beautiful and impossible creatures he had ever seen. They were tiny, their scales shimmering with the soft colors of a nebula, one a deep ruby, one a smoky gray, and the last a pale pearlescent silver. As the light hit them, they stirred, and 3 pairs of enormous liquid dark eyes blinked open. They stared up at the giant face peering down at them and went rigid with fear. They were dragons. Tiny, impossible, baby dragons. For a long moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Kale's rational scientific mind struggled to process it. Dragons. They weren't in any database. They were myths, fantasies, stories his grandfather used to tell him. Yet, here they were, real, and curled up in his blanket. His first thought was clinical, unknown species, potentially venomous. His grip on the knife tightened. The ruby-colored one let out a tiny, almost silent hiss, a pathetic attempt at intimidation that was more adorable than threatening. He saw the frantic pulse beating in their slender necks. He saw them tremble, not from cold, but from sheer terror. They weren't a threat. They were babies, lost, frightened, and just looking for warmth. And in that instant, something inside Kale broke. The 2 years of crushing loneliness, of relentless struggle, of building walls around his heart just to survive, it all crumbled. The hardened survivor vanished. He was replaced by something much older, much more fundamental. He was just a man, looking at a creature in need. He saw their profound vulnerability, and in it, a reflection of his own desperate loneliness. He hadn't realized how much he'd craved a connection to another living thing. His training screamed at him to be cautious, but his heart, a long dormant muscle, whispered something else. A slow warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it. Empathy. The hard, weary lines around his eyes softened. The grim set of his mouth relaxed. And then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Kale smiled. It wasn't a big grin, but a small, gentle, and utterly genuine smile that reached his eyes. It was a smile of wonder, relief, and a sudden affection that caught him completely by surprise. He let out a soft, low chuckle. The hatchlings flinched, but the sound wasn't aggressive. It was gentle. They watched him, their intelligent eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. He'd forgotten all about the knife in his other hand. Slowly, he loosened his grip and let it fall silently onto the cot. He made no sudden moves. He just held their gaze, letting his smiles say what words couldn't. "You're safe." The tension in the tiny creatures eased. The ruby one's hiss subsided. The silver one stopped trembling. After another long moment, Kale moved his motions infinitely slow. He lowered the blanket, then carefully adjusted the folds to create a more secure nest around them. He gently wrapped them up, his large, calloused hands moving with a surgeon's care. In that moment, a silent pact was made, an act of kindness that rewrote not only their destiny, but his own. When Kale woke again, it was to the gentle pressure of 3 tiny bodies still nestled against him. Cryos's weak, purple light streamed through the viewport, signaling another day. But for Kale, it felt like the first day of a new life. He looked down at the sleeping dragons, now a warm, breathing bundle on his chest. A profound sense of purpose settled over him. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a guardian. His first challenge was food. He had no idea what baby dragons ate. He mashed up some of his nutrient paste with warm, purified water into a thin gruel. Scooping a little onto his fingertip, he gently offered it to the now-awake hatchlings. Ember, the ruby one, sniffed it suspiciously before extending a tiny forked tongue to taste it. Its eyes widened in what looked like delight, and it began to lap eagerly at his finger. Cinder and Ash soon followed. A wave of relief washed over Kale. He could do this. He could care for them. Over the next few days, a new routine took hold. Kale built them a proper nest in an insulated crate, lined with soft fabrics and a low-power heater. But the hatchlings, having known the superior warmth of his presence, would often abandon it. Each night, one by one, they would make the journey back to his cot and burrow under his blanket, seeking the comforting rhythm of his heartbeat. Kale soon gave up trying to move them, and their nightly cuddle became a cherished ritual. He started talking to them, his voice filling the silence that had oppressed him for 2 years. He told them stories of Earth, of green forests and vast blue oceans. The dragons would watch him, their heads cocked, their intelligent eyes following his every move. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the gentle, loving tone. They began to respond with their own soft chirps and purrs. He gave them names: Ember for its fiery, bold spirit, Cinder for its quiet, watchful nature, and Ash for its shy, delicate beauty. The habitat, once a sterile survival pod, became a nursery. Kale watched with a father's pride as they took their first clumsy steps. He laughed out loud when they attempted their first flights, their little wings beating furiously just to hover for a second before they tumbled back to the ground. They chased the red dot of his laser multi-tool across the floor, playing with an energy that filled the small space with life and joy. One evening, Kale sat by the viewport, a steaming mug of broth in his hands. Ember was perched on his shoulder, nudging his ear affectionately. Cinder was asleep in his lap, and Ash was batting playfully at the zipper on his jacket. Outside, the perpetual twilight of Cryos descended, and the auroras began their silent, majestic dance. The wind still howled its mournful song, but for the first time Kale didn't hear it as a threat. It was just noise, powerless against the warmth and life that now filled his small sanctuary. He was no longer Kale, the stranded survivor, the lonely ghost on a forgotten world. He was Kale, the man who had been found. His mission had failed, his ship was gone, and his future was a complete unknown. But as he looked at the 3 small, miraculous beings who had stumbled into his life, he knew he was richer than he had ever been. A single act of kindness, a simple smile in the face of the unknown, had not only saved 3 tiny lives from the merciless cold, but it had also rescued his own humanity from the brink of icy despair. It had woven their destinies together, creating a beautiful tapestry of hope in a cold, indifferent universe. Sometimes the smallest creature can make the biggest difference. If this story warmed your heart, hit that like button to show your support. For more stories that explore the best of us, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. What names would you have given the 3 dragon babies? Share your ideas in the comments below.